to become involved in a program of re-education to educate our people into the importance of knowing that when you spend your dollar out of the community in which you live, the community in which you spend your money becomes richer and richer. The community out of which you take your money becomes poorer and poorer. And because these Negroes who have been misled and misguided are breaking their necks to take their money and spend it with the man is becoming richer and richer, and you're becoming poorer and poorer. And then what happens? The community in which you live becomes a slum. It becomes a ghetto. The conditions become run down. And then you have the audacity to complain about poor housing in a rundown community. Why, you run it down yourself when you take your dollar out. And you and I are in a double track, because not only do we lose by taking our money someplace else and spending it, when we try and spend it in our own community, we're trapped because we haven't had sense enough to set up stores and control the businesses of our community. The man who's controlling the stores in our community is a man who doesn't look like we do. He's a man who doesn't even live in the community. So you and I, even when we try and spend our money in the block where we live or the area where we live, we're spending it with a man who, when the sun goes down, takes that basket full of money in another part of the town.
Brothers and sisters, we are stressing that it is critical to continue and unite around issues that will revamp, rehabilitate, and restore our communities. There are positive things being done. At the same time, there are dire problems we face as well from an economic, political, social, and spiritual standpoint. Decades after the civil rights movement transformed the nation, why is it that Black America is dissatisfied? Why have they rioted, destroyed their own communities? What is the problem? Economically, civil rights gains took more from us than gave. Sure, some got great paying jobs, but the Black masses were left behind facing the same conditions. It is critical that we strengthen our group, because while as individuals, some of us may hold high-ranking positions in corporate America, government agencies, or our own businesses, as some of us may reside far from the scenes of Black despair, all Blacks, Africans, are identifiable members of one racial group. Furthermore, as a racial group, we are powerless, impoverished, and increasingly unable to compete in America and even around the world. And whether they intend to or not, those outside of our group will see us as one group. Historically, in the face of racist and discriminatory laws against Africans in America, in the 1900s and through the 1920s, we had thriving communities because we had to work together to survive. Successful and aspiring Black communities like Rosewood, Florida, Wilmington and Winston-Salem, North Carolina, Tulsa, Oklahoma, Atlanta, Georgia, and Washington, D.C. are just a few examples of how Black people were coming together, pooling their resources, and creating and thriving in their own communities. And what happened to a lot of these thriving Black communities? They faced extreme, irrational hostility amongst outside forces in America that caused a lot of racial riots between Africans in America and Europeans. The root problem in Black communities across America is race and the unjust distribution of the nation's wealth, power, and resources. One race, the descendant of white Europeans, seemingly has checkmated Black efforts to improve themselves. White lives and privileged conditions and nearly 100% ownership and control of the nation's wealth, power, businesses, and all levels of government support and resources. White society has a monopoly of ownership and control. Though Black America reside in the richest nation on earth, their standard of living is comparable to that of the third world nations. Blacks own and control less than 2% of the nation's wealth, power, and resources of the nation, so they will have little control over their lives and the conditions in which they are living under. During slavery, legal measures were taken to keep blacks in a dependent state and excluded from enjoying the fruits of a nation that their labor was building. Free blacks were forced to survive or perish off of the marginal resources that extended in their own communities. And you can see how that's being played out today. Controlling less than 2% of the nation's wealth, primarily in the form of a primary residence, automobile, and savings accounts, American blacks have little wealth to pass on. Due to the minuscule number of black businesses, few blacks ever inherit a business. Discriminatory policies within the banking industry, insurance industry, and mortgage companies have impeded blacks' economic progress and the acquisition of wealth. Marginal incomes force most blacks into apartment renting or public housing tendency, which provides neither tax shelters nor equity for future black generations to inherit. In essence, black heirs are likely to inherit permanent poverty and an unpaid debt. Wealth is the primary problem. Employment is secondary. There is a big difference between having a job and having wealth. Jobs are not designed to create wealth. They are intended to keep employees one payday away from the poorhouse and to satisfy workers' basic consumer needs. Real wealth is accumulated via investment returns and ownership profits. Blacks are the only group of people forced to practice capitalism without capital in the richest and most capitalistic nation on earth. These facts, coupled with the majority society's total unwillingness to approve corrective actions and reparations to descendants of black enslaved people, reveal the true nature of racism against black people. The three major impediments to black competitiveness is maldistribution of wealth and resource powers, inappropriate behavior patterns, and lack of national plan for empowerment. We paid a high price for horizontal social integration, including the loss of our communities, culture, colleges, professional sports teams, political leadership, and businesses. As we open our culture and communities and abandon blackness, our competitors came in and filled the void. Today's black neighborhoods no longer qualify to even be called quasi-communities because they no longer have a network of black businesses or a group or code of conduct. Today, black neighborhoods are primarily where the majority of black people eat and sleep. They do not embody the criteria of a functional community. Consequently, black neighborhoods are typically referred to as ghettos, urban areas, inner cities, or they are sometimes identified by such terms as the hood. These broad, ambiguous terms signal the dependent, non-competitive nature of black geographical area across the country. The black community suffers from brain drain. The best trained blacks depend upon whites to hire them. Though historically they have had very little choice in employment options, it becomes racially self-defeating for blacks to devote their lives to professional careers in white businesses, in white communities, or in white-controlled government agencies. In a 300-century-old national public policy on the use of blacks stipulated that blacks would serve as a labor force for creating wealth and comfort for whites. As Sobonfu Some put it, the goal of community is to make sure that each member of the community is heard and is properly given the gifts he or she has brought to the world. Without this giving, the community dies, and without the community, the individual is left without a place where he or she can contribute. The community is that grounding place where people can come and share their gifts and receive from others. When you don't have a community, you are not listened to. You don't have a place where you can go and feel that you really belong. You don't have people to affirm who you are and to support you in bringing forward your gifts. This disempowers the psyche, makes you vulnerable to consumerism and all the things that come along with it. Also, it leads many people who have wonderful contributions to make them hold back their gifts, not knowing where to put them. And without the unloading of our gifts, we experience blockage inside, which affects us spiritually, mentally, and physically in many different ways. We are left without a home to go to when we need to be seen. Black people should capitalize on their potential strengths, beginning with those areas where they are dominant or can control basic resources, such as in the area of music, entertainment, government, municipalities, urban lands and buildings, the approximately 300 billion of annual disposable black income, and the 44 million strong black consumer market. The hope of black empowerment begins at home, in black communities, not within the 500 major corporations or in white suburbs. Once black communities are rebuilt, industries, more so than businesses, will provide them with greater income, wealth, employment, and power building opportunities. We need vertical integration and establish control of our raw materials and manufacturing, and by building their own suppliers, distributors, and retail outlets. We also have to be able to collectively encourage and support independent black suppliers and retail outlets, production, distribute, and retail. Dr. Claud Anderson provides us with elements of functional communities. The first thing we must do is convert residential neighborhoods into functional communities that contain three key components, or elements, or operating systems. First, there should be an independent economy that is wholly owned by residents of the community and provide consumer products, services, businesses, and employment opportunities. Second, they should have an active code of conduct and group accountability. Third, they should take a form of governance that collectively speaks for the residences and is capable of applying political pressure to outside groups. And if we go back and study our true African culture, a lot of what we face in today as a people is really foreign to us. Poverty is just one example. Steve Biko once said that poverty was a foreign concept. This could only be brought about to the entire community by an adverse climate during a particular season. It never was considered repugnant to ask one's neighbor for help when one was struggling. In almost all instances, there was help between individuals, tribe and tribe, chief and chief, even despite war. In his book Dusk to Dawn, W.E.B. DuBois writes that when he went to Africa in a town called Vase, it was clean, restrained, and no selfish place but the central abode of fire and hospitality, clean swept for wayfarers. As visitors came to their communities, they gave out their hands with a quick, soft grasp and talked easily. Their manners were much more better and natural than places in Europe and America. He goes on to describe that the African children were well trained and completely different from children in Europe and America who would display utter ignorance of courtesy. Come to Africa and see well-bred and courteous children playing happily and never sniffling and whining. He also says that Senegal was swarming with humanity, but no quarrel or fight broke out, which he says if this happened in the Western cities, the police would have been very busy there. He concludes that African life with its isolation has deeper knowledge of human souls. The village life, foraways bring intimate human knowledge that the Western nations miss, sinking the individual and the social. Africans know fewer folk, but know them infinitely better. Their intertwined communal souls, therefore, brook no poverty or prostitution. These things to them are not understandable. In his book, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa, Walter Rodney describes that European travelers who left written accounts of Zululand in Shaka's time were impressed by the cleanliness as they were with Benin in the 15th century. And they were equally struck by the social order, absence of theft, sense of security, among other things, just like the Arabs were who traveled in the Western Sudan during its period of imperial greatness. In actual fact, both the cleanliness and the security of life and property were part of Zulu life from long before. And under Shaka, what was impressive was the scale in which these things extended, owing to the protective umbrella of the state. In his book, The Falsification of African Consciousness, Dr. Amos notes that African people who forget their history are people who forget they had an economy before Europeans came into existence. When Samuel Nancy needed $35,000 to open his bar, he didn't bother with banks. He turned to tontines, an informal credit system rooted in African tradition. Without signing a paper or filling out a form, Mr. Nancy emerged from his monthly tontine meeting with $35,000 in cash. The economic system that Europeans set up doesn't match us. It doesn't match our mentality. We must develop a banking system and a money system in line with our economic reality. The Cameroon system was a money pot worth $1 million. This is a group of people who are organized along the lines of African tradition, which makes it available to its members $1 million a month. Here we are rich and filled with money and can't even make available to our own people $10 a month. That means one person belonging to that group each monthly has available to them $1 million to do what he or she wants to do. Did they go to banks? Did they go to the Small Business Administration? No, they went to themselves because they are within their culture and tradition. As we pointed out several examples of traditional African culture and values, it is clear that our traditional culture was bastardized and nearly beaten out of shape by outside forces, but not completely destroyed, as we have enough information and examples to reflect upon and learn from. This is like the West African Sankofa mythology of returning to the source to improve our future. We mentioned in the beginning that there were thriving, aspiring, and affluent black communities in America on the eve and first part of the 20th century, but we must not lose sight of our global history, a history that has been proven we had more than just thriving communities in America, but nations, empires, and enormous civilizations in Africa and even on other continents. We've done it before. Let's learn from it, modernize it to fit our current situation, and do it again. Now, when we say this, we are well aware that apparently any sign of self-sufficiency, self-reliance, and self-determination among African people around the world is met with irrational hostility to the point of violence. But this shouldn't deter us because us succeeding as a people is crucial to our survival. We don't advocate violence or any act of aggression, but we do advocate self-defense and our right as human beings to continue our existence on this earth if our lives and property is threatened. Let's get this done, family. And as the Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey said, rise up, ye mighty race, and accomplish what you will.